Hey folks, welcome back to the channel and welcome to a new real-life car review. In this episode I'm driving the all-new Nissan Juke Hybrid. All new, I hear you say? Yeah, it isn't all new. It's been on the market for a couple of years now, but the hybrid part is new. So let's have a peek under the hood and see what's new there. So what's going on here? What we do have here is a 1.6 petrol engine, 94 horsepower. Over here is the inverter for the electric motor, and the electric motor hides in the very special gearbox. It's a 4-speed non-synchronized gearbox with an integrated electric motor. It has 49 horsepower. It's a 400 volt electric system, and there's a 1.2 kilowatt hours battery, 400 volt also, that's hiding in the trunk. And there's a 12 volt integrated starter generator that starts the engine, and it also helps to synchronize the gears during gear shifts. Now the hybrid part of this drivetrain revolves around the gearbox. It's a very special thing. It's developed by Renault. It's known as the E-Tech Hybrid in several Renault models. It is a co-development with Nissan, but I think Renault did a majority of this part, even though Nissan supplied the electric motor that's hiding inside this gearbox. And it's special in the sense that it only has 4 gears. It's an unsynchronized gearbox, and it also has no clutch. So the main shaft of the gearbox is directly connected to the crankshaft. And in order to shift an unsynchronized gearbox, you need to synchronize the speed of the shaft and the gears. And that synchronization is done by the electric motors. One can speed up one shaft, the other can slow down the other. And that when you have the speed synchronized, the speed of the gear and the shaft, the dog clutch can engage and your gear shift is done. And the car is in gear, by the way. Now I think it's a very interesting transmission in the sense I wanted to know a little bit more of the inner workings, how it's operated. Is it partially hydraulic, is it electromechanic? But there's very little to be found online, so if you can fill me in on that, leave a note down below in the comments where we can find more information. As you may have noticed, it's very windy, so let's close the hood and let's have a peek in the interior. In the interior, everything looks very familiar if you know the regular Juke. There are 2 things that you can notice: that the instrument cluster is a bit changed, the tachometer is no longer there, and there's also no coolant temperature gauge. Instead, they use this large power indicator, and there's a small indicator for the state of charge of the battery. There's a large full color screen in between the gauges, and also there's an EV button over here to force the car in EV mode. Now in EV mode the car can only drive a short distance, I'll blink it in screen here, and only up to 50 kilometers an hour. Once you surpass that speed, the car goes in hybrid mode. Now it can do full electric driving, even at higher speeds, but that's determined by the software. You can't force the car into EV mode and drive 100 kilometers an hour. Now the hybrid comes with a normal gear selector, park, return, neutral, drive. There isn't an option for manual shifting, and there are no pedals behind the steering wheel. Just select that. Only thing I miss is an indicator on here. Now it's in park. When I go to return, neutral or drive, it isn't illuminated. Well, it does show here in the central display, but I think it would also be nice to have an indication of sorts here. Another thing that sets the hybrid apart from the regular Juke models is this E-pedal button. Now in E-pedal driving you can have a single pedal driving where you can control the deceleration or regeneration with your gas pedal, and it's very convenient for city driving, on back roads, country roads, highways. I wouldn't recommend it because the E-pedal is really sensitive, and even when you take your foot a little back from the gas pedal or pull it back just a tiny amount, the car immediately starts to decelerate. So if you want to use the coasting function and you look far ahead, which you should do on highway driving, E-pedal is not recommended. Now I do like the steering wheel. It's not too thick and it's not too large in diameter. You can adjust it in multiple directions over quite a broad distance. It's very easy to find a good seating position, and the dash itself, measured from the windscreen to over here, isn't that deep, so it's very short and creates a lot of space. I do like those 3 round fans in the middle, and there's a small cluster over here for the climate control. It's a single sound climate control, no dual sound or fancy things, anything like that. A small infotainment screen. It is a touch screen. You also can operate it with this dial, and I think that's very smart. For instance, when I select audio, now I'm going to the digital audio menu. Now I can swipe this, but during driving, swiping is no option. You always miss the thing you want to touch. And then you can use this rotary dial on the right hand side to scroll through the options and then push to select the options. Simple as that. Also like the fact that it has a rotary dial for the volume, with the push function for switching it on and off. I like that very much. And also there are rotary dials for the climate control. It's very nice. You can really work that by your muscle memory. Now, of course, we should have a peek in the trunk. One thing to note is this door grip over here. It's too high for children. So when you have smaller children, well, this is out of reach for them. Something you have to keep in mind. We have smaller children. The door swings open quite wide, and you sit quite low. This is the first time I sat in the back behind myself. Well, leg room is good, headroom is good. That's of course because the seat isn't that high up in respect to the floor, but I do like the seating position over here. Of course, we do a window test. Open the window first, shut the window. Yeah, view to the outside is good, but when you have smaller children, it can be a bit claustrophobic in here. It's also because that the headliner and everything, the upholstery is very black in here. But all in all, the seating position I think is well good enough. I think adults can last a couple of hours in here. For smaller children it's a bit less than ideal because the window line is fairly up high, but it's good. And of course we need to have a peek in the trunk too. There's a 2-layer trunk floor, upper stir, nice board, and over here we have a tire repair kit, and there's a small hatch in here that allows access to the battery that's hiding in between the axle. There is no battery to be seen here. Since the battery is down here, the metal trunk floor is raised, and it decreases the trunk space, the cargo space, by about 70 liters. Not much, and I think, well, the trunk floor is very usable. If you're going on a weekend vacation, well, you can pack enough luggage for a small family, I think. Prices for the Nissan Juke Hybrid start at €34,000 for the N-connected trim level. The N-design costs €36,800 and the upper trim level, the Tecna, starts at €36,000. The test car is a Tecna with the Gold Pack, €500, and the Sound and Ride Pack, €1,100. As tested, this car costs €37,590. Okay folks, the weather is extremely crappy. This car is fitted with a Cool and Ride Pack. I believe it has 2 options. One of the options is the Cool and Ride Pack, which contains the heated front seats, 2 positions. Also has a heated front windscreen, and according to the brochure it should have a heated steering wheel, but I haven't found a button for it, and I really question whether or not it has a heated steering wheel. So let's head off for a drive. Now the car always sets off in the electric mode, so taking off from a standstill is always done by the electric motor. At this moment the petrol engine is driving too, but I can see on the energy monitor that it is done because it needs to charge the battery in the trunk, and the state of charge indicator reads 30% right now, so that explains why the engine is running. Now one thing you will immediately notice when you start driving this car, it's very light, it feels very nimble. Blinking the waiting screen here. Car always sets off in normal mode. It has 3 drive modes: normal, sport and eco. In eco it really is an eco-conscious, say, sluggish car. The throttle response is very slow and it does a lot of regenerative braking. But when you're eco-minded and you want to drive a long distance with great fuel economy, you go for that, and you really do get great fuel economy. On the other hand, when you switch the car into sport mode, the car it immediately changes. Not only does the throttle response change, but also the amount of assist by the electric power steering changes. The steering ratio doesn't change, but the weight of the steering changes, and I really like that setup of the car. Yesterday evening, it was the first day of daylight saving time, and I was a bit bored in the evening, so I went for a drive. Something I usually don't do with test cars, but I wanted to check the drive modes, and I immediately noticed that the car is very different in those drive modes. In my opinion, those drive mode selectors are somewhat gimmicky. The only thing they change is the throttle response and sometimes the background lighting in the instrument panel, and that's about it. But this car, it really does change the car. Oh, brake for you. Get away, bird. Speaking about braking, I'm not too familiar with this drivetrain, even though it's been around in several Renault models, as I said, in the Juke Hybrid models. And I've heard some stories about the drivetrain calibration, that there could be some shocks when you're braking, and when the petrol engine kicks in or the electric motor takes over, you can really feel that. But I must say that isn't the case in this car, and I'm not sure if that's something that the Nissan engineers have done, or that the general drivetrain calibration from Nissan and Renault models with this drivetrain have changed or improved. But I noticed yesterday evening when I was driving and did a little bit of faster driving, exiting from corners and entering corners under hard braking, the gear shifts are seamless, and the way the petrol engine and the electric motors work together, and how the synchronization of those unsynchronized 4 gears is done, that's all seamless. And even under hard braking, when the car is downshifting, also the regenerative braking and the hydraulic brakes have to work together. Now, our family daily driver is a Prius hybrid, a second generation Prius from 2005, and even though that's a very good hybrid system, you can tell under hard braking when the hydraulic brakes and the regenerative braking are crossing each other's paths. But in this car, that isn't the case. So I'm quite impressed with how this gearbox is constructed. I think it's a very interesting construction and the way it works, but also how everything works together in this car. It's very seamless, so I'm impressed by that. Now, as you can see, we're driving on the back road here. It's a bit bumpy. There are a lot of joints across the road and some crack repairs, and this is where you can obviously tell from the non-stabilized image that those 19-inch wheels have a very harsh ride to them. Good day, sir. So like I said, those 19-inch wheels, they are mainly for looks and not for drive comfort. I must say the steering precision is very good, even though those electric power assist steerings lack a bit of feedback that you had with the older hydraulic systems. But the steering is very precise. In normal drive mode, it's a bit on the light side, but I can see why they chose that setup and that amount of steering. But once you switch the car into sport mode, it really changes, and I like the weight and the feeling the steering has back then. And even though it lacks the feedback you had from older hydraulic systems, it still is a very precise system. So that complaint about lack of feedback that you used to have in the older days, you can forget about that. Steering is still very precise, and also tire technology has greatly improved over the years. So I think those two exchange each other. What you lack in feedback, the quality and the grip of newer tires completely make up for that. Okay, switching on Pro Pilot now. Accelerating to 80 kilometers an hour, and we're in cruise control. It has steering assist. It has of course lane departure warning, and I want to touch that. You always hear me complain about lane departure warning systems, but it's mainly due to the broad variety of road markings we have here. Usually they don't work unless you're on a highway. So on this type of road you have a lot of lane markings and you always have to switch off the lane departure warning. Now in this car, you go into the menu for Pro Pilot, you can access it during driving, and you can very easily switch the lane departure warning off. And the good thing is, once it is switched off, it remains switched off, and I like that very much. Like I mentioned in the interior segment, same goes for the auto hold function. Once you have it switched on, it remains switched on until you push the button. It's not interrupted or restarted when you start the car, stop or start the car once again. Now we're approaching a roundabout here. I'm on regenerative braking. Now the hydraulic brakes have to take over. I know the hydraulic brakes have to take over there because there is not enough regenerative braking, not enough braking torque. But you can tell where the transition is between regenerative braking and the hydraulic brakes. It's done very well. But one thing I do like very much about Nissans, and the same goes for this Nissan Juke, that it has a lot of physical controls, and I like the direct shortcuts to important functions. And those are functions many other manufacturers typically overlook. For instance, we have a switch over here within direct reach for the day and nighttime mode for the background lighting of this display. When I had picked up this car, I drove it in the evening and the screen was a bit too bright. I pushed the button, now it switches to nighttime mode, but immediately it shows a slider in top of screen which I can control with this rotary knob and switch my preferred amount of background lighting, push to confirm, and there it is, just under a push of a button. And the same goes for the illumination of the instrument panel. There's a switch you can reach by muscle memory and you can set the background illumination of the gauge cluster. I like that very much. And another thing I like when you're maneuvering or parking, this car has an around view monitor. It's an optional system. It's in one of the packages. I'll blink it in here. And when you're maneuvering and you're not sure if there is enough clearance of enough space or any obstacles around the car, you just push the camera button and you get a round view monitor. There's no need to scroll through a menu. It's just one push of the button and there you have your around view monitor, and I like that very much. Rotary knobs, push to select, push to confirm. Same goes for the climate control. It's very clever. So like I said, it doesn't have a dual zone climate control, but the fact that it's all physical buttons, well, makes up for that. Now the car is currently on winter tires, but I must say the car is very quiet. Every now and then you can hear the petrol engine when it's charging on under acceleration. And speaking of that, you can also tell there's a real disconnect between the engine speed and the vehicle speed. Sometimes you can hear the engine revving, or it's in a higher rev range, and you think, well, it's about time for an upshift. But then you look into the energy monitor and you can see that it is charging the battery at that moment. You can also see it on the state of charge indicator, so that explains why you hear the engine. It's the same as you had with the older Toyota Prius models. There was this very strong disconnect between engine speed. You could hear the engine whine at a constant high rev, and the vehicle was accelerating. That was something people really had to get used to back in the day. This car kind of has the same, but overall you don't hear the petrol engine a lot. It's a very quiet car, I must say. And even though it's currently on winter tires, it is very quiet. And to me, that's an example of the quality of Nissan as a car builder, because when they built a Nissan Leaf, which isn't the most modern of electric cars, but they have built 2 generations. Electric cars are very quiet, so every rattle, creak, or noise in the car is amplified by the fact that the electric drivetrain is so quiet. But ever since the Nissan Leaf has been around, I noticed that the cars, the interior, the materials, cracks and rattles were completely absent. And you can tell that Nissan has that experience in building quiet interiors and having good noise insulation in this car too. It is very quiet. It's been very windy lately, and only at highway speeds, when you have a crosswind head onto the A-pillar, then you can hear some wind noise, but overall the car is very quiet. Now I've touched upon the ProPilot system and the fact that you can switch off the lane departure warning and it remains off. There is one tiny flaw in the system, and it's very noticeable on highways. When you're overtaking a car, we don't have a keep your lane system over here in the Netherlands. You always return to the rightmost lane if possible. And when you have overtaken a car and you return to your own lane, every now and then the front radar picks up the guardrail, when there is any. If it picks up the guardrail while you're returning to your lane, ProPilot thinks that's another car on the road. So what it does, while you are steering back towards your lane, the car steers back again to the left to stay in your lane, and it brakes ever so gently, even though there isn't an obstacle and you could have went into the lane on your right hand side. And it's especially annoying for traffic that's behind you, that's also overtaking the car you just overtook. They see a blue Nissan Juke return to the lane. Oh no, it does not, and it even brakes. So that's very annoying for traffic behind you. And I think that's mainly a software problem, and I think Nissan should address that. Once you know it, you can adjust to that, but there is room for improvement. And another thing I noticed in the evening hours when it's dark over here, that the automatic high beams do not always respond to oncoming traffic, especially when they're motorcyclists or bicyclists. They pick up the lights, the lamps, the headlights quite late when they're smaller vehicles in oncoming traffic. And the end result is that they look into the blazing LED headlights of this car. And also what I noticed during driving in the evening hours with high beams on, there are some darker spots in the light on the road. And there isn't a uniform bright spot by the lights, but there are some smaller dark spots. And the first time I noticed that, I got distracted by it because I thought there was something on the road, but then I saw it moved ahead with vehicle speed. Then I realized it was just a dark spot from the high beams. Yeah folks, spring is in the air. Farmers are hard at work. Good thing, by the way. One of the many speed bumps. I must say the suspension tuning, springs, shocks is fairly good. It's only those 19-inch wheels that take up a lot of ride comfort. If you want my opinion, please go for the 17 or 18-inch wheels. Well, I've been driving around in this car for a couple of days now. It's only then when I realized that the seats are fairly good. They are not, well, very special. They're clad with synthetic leather. It's nice. I like cloth upholstery better, I must say. But Nissan always had a way of making good seats, and ever since the Nissan Pulsar, which isn't on the market anymore, they've had remarkably good seats. And I believe Nissan once had a cooperation with NASA, or used a NASA principle for lower back support in seats. And I must say I can drive for hours and hours in this car without getting a sore back or a sore butt. Seats are really good. I do like it in a car. These are basic seats with basic adjustment. I have height adjustment. I can adjust the backrest, but there are no adjustable lumbar supports or anything. But even despite the limited amount of adjustment these seats have, they are very good. Really suitable for long drives. So what are my final thoughts on the Nissan Juke Hybrid? Well, let me start off by saying that the regular Juke with the 1-liter 3-cylinder turbocharged engine already is a very pleasant car to drive. Even though it only makes 114 horsepower, it's a very fun to drive car. The Hybrid isn't a replacement, it's an addition to the engine lineup, and it's the top of the range for the Juke models over here in Europe. It really makes sense, and what surprised me the most that it has very different characteristics. When you switch the car into eco mode, it really is a eco-conscious car with great fuel economy. In eco mode I average 5.4 liters per 100 kilometers, which is exceptionally well given the weather circumstances we still have over here. We had hail, we had snow during the test period. In normal mode it's a very pleasant car to drive. I like the added benefit of driving in electric mode. Have a quiet car, the smooth transitions it has between the petrol engine and the electric engine, and also it's a very smooth car to drive thanks to the added electric motor it has. When you switch the car to sport mode, it really changes the car. Okay, it's not a sports car, it's not a Gran Turismo or anything, but it really is a different car, and it's really pleasant car to drive in sport mode, and I like that very much. As a family car it makes sense, but you have to keep in mind when you have small children, they don't have a good view towards the outside due to the high window line, and the cargo space is limited. It's also a bit extra limited because of the battery in the trunk, but overall it makes sense as a family car. Well, that being said, I'm pleasantly surprised by this car, and if you're in the market for a Juke and you can't spend the extra money, I think the hybrid powertrain is really worth the money. It adds extra driving pleasure, it adds great fuel economy, and overall the added benefit of the electric motor is the smooth and seamless driving you have. So all in all, if you're in the market for this car, you should check out the Hybrid Driveline. For now, I would like to thank you for watching this real-life car review. If you liked it, please give me a like, maybe subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or any additional information, leave a note down below in the comments. And if you want to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee. I'll leave the link down below in the description. And for now, I would like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye bye.